It arrived unexpectedly on the morning of my 70th birthday. A thick black envelope with silver lettering spelling out my name, Eleanor Clarke. No return address, just an elegant funeral home logo embossed in the corner. Inside was an invitation to my own funeral. A celebration of life, scheduled for next weekend, meticulously planned by my 3 children without my knowledge. Complete with catering details, eulogy assignments, and a note that read, "Surprise, Mom! Time to practice for the inevitable." Their signatures at the bottom, James, Rebecca, and Michael, written with the casual confidence of people who thought they knew exactly what the future held. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers trembling slightly as I examined the heavy cardstock, the carefully selected font, the professionally designed program. I wasn't dead yet, but according to this, I was already halfway into the grave. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I suppose I should have been upset. Most mothers would be. But as I traced the outline of the elegant black casket printed on the invitation, a strange calm washed over me. For 6 months, I'd been waiting for the perfect moment. Now, it had arrived gift-wrapped in black crepe paper. They thought they were being clever, perhaps even loving in their morbid way. A birthday reminder that at 70, I should be getting my affairs in order. Their subtle hint that it was time to discuss their inheritance. What they didn't know was that I'd already gotten my affairs in order, just not in the way they expected. I carefully returned the invitation to its envelope and placed it on the counter beside my half-finished cup of tea. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen windows, catching the silver threads in my hair as I checked the time. 3 hours until they arrived for my surprise birthday lunch. 3 hours to prepare for a revelation that would change everything. Some mothers spoil their children with too much love. I had spoiled mine with too much money. But that was about to change. The house was quiet as I moved toward my study, my slippers whispering against the hardwood floors. This Victorian home had been in our family for generations, a sprawling reminder of the Clarke family wealth that had shaped my children's expectations since birth. My late husband Harold's portrait watched me from above the fireplace, his stern expression forever captured in oils. He had built an empire in commercial real estate, leaving us with more money than we could spend in several lifetimes. "What would you think of what I've done, Harold?" I murmured to his painted face. His eyes, as always, remained judgmental and silent. In my study, I unlocked the antique desk that had belonged to my grandmother. Inside the bottom drawer lay a leather portfolio, the physical evidence of 6 months of careful planning. I ran my fingers over the embossed gold lettering. The Eleanor Clarke Foundation. My legacy, my redemption, and soon to be my children's greatest shock. My thoughts drifted back to Christmas last year, the moment when I realized just how badly I had failed as a mother. We had gathered in the formal dining room, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier, fine china laid out for a feast prepared by the chef I'd hired for the occasion. James had brought his 3rd wife, a former yoga instructor half his age. Rebecca had arrived alone, as usual, her executive personality having scared away another potential partner. Michael, my youngest, showed up 2 hours late, still reeking of last night's whiskey and God knows what else. The evening had progressed pleasantly enough until Harold's antique grandfather clock chimed 9, and the conversation inevitably turned to money. "Mom," James had said, swirling his expensive bourbon, "Rebecca and I were talking, and we think it's time you consider downsizing. This place is too much for you to manage alone." Rebecca nodded, her sharp features emphasizing her corporate efficiency. "We found some lovely retirement communities. Very exclusive. You'd be around people your own age." What they meant was, the house was worth millions, and they didn't want it wasted as a single elderly woman's residence. Better to sell it, Move me somewhere appropriate and add the proceeds to their future inheritance. I'm managing fine, I'd replied, cutting into my roast with deliberate precision. Michael, who had barely touched his food, looked up from his phone. They're right, Mom. Plus, your portfolio needs restructuring. My friend's a financial advisor. He says with the current market, you could be making way better returns if you let him manage it. I set down my knife and fork. And his commission would be? Michael had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. That's not the point. But it was exactly the point. It always had been. Later that night, after they'd all left with kisses, on my cheek and promises to visit more often, promises I knew they wouldn't keep unless they needed something, I sat alone in Harold's study. The Christmas tree lights blinked in the adjacent room, casting alternating shadows as I poured myself a rare glass of Harold's prize scotch. That was when I truly saw my children for the first time in decades, not as the babies I'd cradled, or the teenagers I'd supported, or even the adults I'd bankrolled through multiple careers, divorces, and fresh starts. I saw them as what they had become, 3 entitled middle-aged vultures circling my remaining years, counting down to their payday. James, my eldest at 45, had never worked a day in his life. He managed his portfolio, money from his trust fund that Harold had established before his values became clear. 2 nasty divorces had dented his fortune, hence his concern about my estate planning. Rebecca, 42, was the only one with an actual career, a vice president, at a marketing firm, but her salary, substantial as it was, couldn't support her Manhattan apartment, her vacation home in the Hamptons, and her shopping habits. The monthly loans she requested had become so routine, I had my accountant automate the transfers preparing, and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And Michael, 38, my baby, the one I'd had the hardest time saying no to. A succession of failed business ventures, rehab stints, and relationship disasters had made him the most expensive disappointment of all. I'd raised 3 children who saw me as nothing more than a walking checkbook with an expiration date. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me sad. And then, as the scotch warmed my throat, it made me determined. The next morning, still wearing my silk pajamas, I had called my attorney, Sophia Goldman. Not the family attorney who had served Harold and knew my children, but a sharp young lawyer I'd met at a charity function who had impressed me with her direct approach. I want to change everything, I told her, and I don't want my children to know until it's done. 6 months later, the funeral invitation in my hand was the perfect cue for the final act of my plan. I gathered the portfolio and a few other documents, placing them in a sleek presentation folder. Then I moved to my closet, bypassing the conservative slacks and sweaters my children were accustomed to seeing me in. Instead, I selected a garment I'd purchased during a secret shopping trip with Sophia, a crimson wrap dress with a flattering neckline and a hemline that hit just above the knee. Daring for a woman my age, according to traditional standards. Perfect for what I had in mind. As I applied makeup, another rarity in my daily routine, I studied my reflection. 70 looked different now than it had in my mother's time. My silver hair was thick and healthy, cut in a stylish bob rather than the permed helmet my mother had worn. Regular swimming and yoga had kept my posture straight and my body relatively firm. The fine lines around my eyes and mouth spoke of decades of expressions, too many forced smiles in recent years, but that was about to change as well. At precisely noon, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and went to greet my children, carrying both their funeral plans and my own vision for the future. James arrived first, his German luxury car purring up the circular driveway precisely at noon, always punctual when money was involved. Rebecca pulled in. Minutes later in her sleek electric vehicle, designer sunglasses perched on her head, Michael would be late, as usual. I watched them from the window of my sitting room, observing their confident strides, the casual way they entered without knocking, entitlement embodied in every movement. "Mom!" James called out, his voice echoing in the foyer. "We're here." I made them wait a full minute before I descended the grand staircase, watching their expressions shift from confidence to surprise as they took in my appearance. "Mother," Rebecca said, her tone betraying her disapproval. "You look different." "Is that a new dress?" James asked, his brow furrowed as if trying to reconcile this version of me with the predictable, fading woman he thought he knew. "It is," I replied simply, reaching the bottom step. I felt like 70 deserved something special. They exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication siblings perfect over decades of collusion. "Happy birthday, Mom," James said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and insincerity. Rebecca followed. Suit, her embrace stiff and formal. "You didn't have to dress up. It's just us." "And that doesn't deserve celebration?" I asked, maintaining my smile. Before they could answer, the front door burst open, and Michael stumbled in, only 30 minutes late, an improvement. His hair was disheveled, eyes slightly bloodshot, but he'd made an effort with his clothing, at least. "Happy birthday, Mommy!" he exclaimed with forced enthusiasm, wrapping me in a bear hug that smelled of cigarettes poorly masked by breath mints. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was insane." It wasn't traffic. It never was. But I returned, his embrace warmly. Of my 3 children, Michael was the most genuinely affectionate, even if that affection was usually followed by requests for money. "Let's move to the dining room," I suggested. "I've had lunch prepared." They followed me through the house, Rebecca immediately noticing the absence of staff. "Where's Mrs. Winters?" she asked, referring to my longtime housekeeper. "I gave her the weekend off," I replied. "The caterer set everything up earlier and left. I thought we could use some privacy." Another exchange of glances behind my back. They were probably wondering if this was a sign of mental decline. Me dismissing staff, dressing differently? Good. Let them underestimate me one last time. The dining room table was set beautifully with fresh flowers, fine china, and crystal glasses. A catered lunch of poached salmon, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread waited under silver warming covers. I'd ordered champagne as well, an extravagance that raised James's eyebrows. "Dom Perignon, Mom? What's the special occasion?" he asked, examining the label with approval. "Besides my 70th birthday?" I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Let's call it a new beginning." Rebecca's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it reflexively. "Sorry, work emergency," she muttered, beginning to type a response. "Put it away, please," I said, my voice firmer than they were accustomed to hearing. "This lunch is important." "Surprised?" She complied, setting the phone face down beside her plate. Michael was already helping himself to champagne, pouring a generous glass without waiting for a toast. Some habits never changed. "Before we eat," I said, reaching beside my chair for the black envelope. I wanted to discuss this. I placed the funeral invitation in the center of the table. The effect was immediate and gratifying. James froze with his water glass halfway to his lips. Rebecca's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly as her eyes widened. Michael choked mid-sip on his champagne. "We can explain," James began, setting down his glass carefully. "It was meant to be thoughtful," Rebecca added quickly. "A practical consideration, not morbid at all." Michael, less adept at deception, simply stared at his plate. "Planning my funeral as a birthday surprise," I said, keeping my tone light. "How very pragmatic of you." "Mom, we just thought—" James started. I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I know exactly what you thought. You've been thinking it for years, that I'm a fading old woman who needs managing. That—" My remaining time should be spent preparing to hand everything over to you. That my only value is in what I leave behind. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken confirmations. We were trying to be helpful, Rebecca finally said, her corporate crisis management skills kicking in. Many families have these conversations at appropriate milestones. Many families don't surprise their mother with funeral invitations, I countered. But that's not really what concerns me. What concerns me is why you're so focused on what happens after I'm gone. Michael, always the most transparent, broke first. Come on, Mom, you know we love you, but you're 70 now. Shouldn't we be talking about, the estate and stuff? There it was. The real birthday gift they'd come to collect. Information about their inheritance. I smiled, reaching for the presentation folder I'd placed beside my seat. As a matter of fact, I do have something to share about the estate. Their postures changed instantly, subtle shifts that betrayed their interest. Backs straightened, eyes focused, champagne glasses set aside. For perhaps the first time in years, I had their complete attention. Over the past 6 months, I began, opening the folder, I've been doing exactly what you suggested at Christmas, getting my affairs in order. James nodded approvingly. That's all we wanted. I'm glad to hear it, I replied, removing the first document, a glossy brochure with the Eleanor Clarke Foundation emblazoned across the front. I slid it to the center of the table. Because my affairs are now perfectly in order. Rebecca reached for the brochure first, her manicured fingers flipping it open. Her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to the beginning of alarm. What is this? My legacy, I answered simply. A charitable foundation dedicated to supporting first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. It's been fully established, registered with all appropriate authorities, and as of last week, funded. Funded? James echoed, a edge of panic entering his voice. Funded with what? I met his gaze steadily. With 90% of my estate. The silence that followed was the kind that falls after an explosion, ringing, disorienting, full of suspended debris waiting to settle. That's not possible, Rebecca finally said, her voice tight. Daddy's will had provisions. For my welfare, yes, I completed her sentence. But the majority of the assets are in my name, and always have been. Harold left everything to me, with the understanding that I would provide for our children. And I have, abundantly, consistently, and to your detriment. Michael's face had gone pale. What does that mean for us? It means, I said, pouring myself a glass of champagne with a steady hand, that the trust funds will remain as they are, untouched and unchanged. The monthly allowances you currently receive will continue until my death. The properties in your names remain yours. But everything else, this house, the bulk of the investments, the art collection, the vacation properties, will go to the foundation. You can't do this, James said, his voice rising. We'll contest it. There are laws. I've spent 6 months with the country's top estate attorneys ensuring that everything is ironclad, I interrupted calmly. You can certainly try to contest it, but you'll be fighting the combined expertise of a legal team that specializes in precisely these matters. Rebecca, always the strategist, was already calculating. How much? She demanded. How much is left for us? Enough that you'll never be poor, I replied. But not enough to continue living as you have been without working. The foundation will receive approximately $800 million. You three will share the remaining, roughly $80 million. The numbers hung in the air like a verdict. $80 million was a fortune by normal standards, more than most people would see in dozens of lifetimes. But compared to what they had been expecting, it was crumbs. Michael's voice was small when he finally spoke. Why, Mom? Why would you do this to us? His question pierced through the shock and anger, reaching something deeper. Why indeed? The answer had been forming in my heart for months, perhaps years. I'm not doing something to you, I said softly. I'm undoing something I've already done. I failed you as a mother in the most fundamental way. I gave you everything except the tools to build meaningful lives. I watched you become people who measure success in bank balances rather than contributions, who evaluate relationships based on what you can get rather than what you can give, who've spent decades waiting for me to die instead of living your own lives fully. I took a sip of champagne, letting my words sink in. This isn't a punishment. It's the first real gift I've given you in years. James pushed back from the table, his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You've lost your mind. We're not going to sit here and— Yes, you are, I said firmly. You're going to sit here and listen, because, for once in your adult lives, you have no choice. You can storm out, call lawyers, throw tantrums, but the documents are signed. The transfers are complete. The foundation exists. Rebecca, analytical even in crisis, was scanning the brochure more carefully now. First-generation college students? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. What do you even know about that? We were privileged. You were privileged. What's this really about? I smiled, grateful for the opening. Contrary to what you might think, I wasn't always Eleanor Clarke, wealthy widow. Before I met your father, I was Eleanor Novak, daughter of Polish immigrants who cleaned houses and drove taxis. The first in my family to attend college, on a scholarship that changed my life. Their expressions transformed from anger to shock. This was a story I had never shared, a past they had never imagined. You never told us, Michael said quietly. Harold didn't think it mattered, I replied. He preferred the narrative that we came from similar backgrounds. It made things simpler in his social circles. And over time, I adopted his preference for simplicity over truth. Another failure on my part. I stood, moving to the sideboard where I kept a framed photo face down in a drawer. I retrieved it and placed it on the table, a faded color photograph from 1972, showing a young woman in a graduation gown standing between an older couple in simple, dated clothing. My parents' proud, weathered faces beamed beside my own younger self. These are your grandparents, I said. Alexander and Irina Novak. They died before you were born. Dad from a heart attack when I was 23. Mom from cancer 2 years later. They worked 60-hour weeks so I could study instead of taking a job at 16. They never owned a home, never took a vacation. But they made sure I could become something they couldn't imagine. My children stared at the photograph, seeing a history they'd never known existed. After they died, I met Harold. He was charming, ambitious, from a good family. He saw potential in me that went beyond my working-class background. When we married, I stepped fully into his world and left mine behind. It seemed easier that way. I returned to my seat, resting my hands on the table. But easy isn't always right. By hiding who I was, I deprived you of understanding where you really came from, of appreciating the privilege that I hadn't been born into but that you took for granted. The room was quiet, the catered lunch forgotten as my children processed this revelation. So, this foundation, Rebecca finally said, gesturing to the brochure, is what? Atonement? It's course correction, I replied. For them, for me, and for you. It will give opportunities to young people who remind me of who I once was, and it will give you the chance to become who you might have been without the expectation of unlimited wealth. And if we don't want that chance? James asked, his initial rage cooling into something harder and more brittle. Then that's your choice, I said simply. You're all in your 40s, too old for me to tell you how to live, but not too old to start over, to build something meaningful. The resources you'll still have are more than enough to do that. I reached into the folder again, removing 3 additional documents, one for each of them. These are invitations, not to a funeral, but to serve on the foundation's board, to help shape how this money will change lives, to be part of something larger than yourselves. Whether you accept is entirely up to you. Michael picked up his invitation first, turning it over in his hands with an unreadable expression. Rebecca's remained untouched before her. James didn't even look at his. "I think we need some time," Rebecca finally said, her professional mask back in place. "This is a lot to process." "Of course," I agreed. "Take all the time you need. The foundation's first board meeting isn't for another month." James stood abruptly. "I'm not hungry anymore. I'll be in touch after I speak with my attorney." "James," I called as he turned to leave. Harold's mother did the same thing to him when he was young. Cut him off, forced him to make his own way. It's why he built his business, why he valued financial independence so highly. He never told you because he was afraid you'd see him differently. Not as a financial genius, but as someone who had to struggle. He paused, his back still to me, shoulders tight with tension. He would have done this himself if he'd lived, long enough to see what his money was doing to you. He just didn't have the courage. Without responding, James walked out. Rebecca followed a moment later, gathering her purse and phone with mechanical precision, her face unreadable. Michael remained seated, staring at the invitation in his hands. Of my 3 children, he had always been the most sensitive, the most troubled, and in many ways, the most perceptive. "Are you still going to help me with rehab if I need it again?" he asked quietly. The question broke my heart a little. Despite everything, his first concern was whether I would still catch him if he fell. "Always," I promised. "That's not what this is about. I'm not abandoning you. I'm just changing the terms of our relationship. The foundation will always pay for treatment if you need it. That's written into the bylaws." He nodded slowly, a tear tracking down his cheek. "I'm really screwed up, Mom." "You're not screwed up," I said gently. "You're stuck. There's a difference." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clearer than I'd seen them in years. "When did you get so wise?" I laughed softly. "Around the time I stopped being so foolish. It's amazing what clarity comes when you finally face your mistakes." Michael stood, tucking the invitation into his jacket pocket. "I should go check on James and Rebecca. They're not going to take this well." "I know," I acknowledged, "but they're stronger than they think. So are you." After he left, I sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by the untouched food and half-empty champagne glasses. The silence felt different now, expectant rather than oppressive. I picked up the photograph of my parents, tracing their faces with my fingertip. "I hope I got it right this time," I whispered to them. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed too, its deep resonance filling the empty house. I gathered the foundation materials, returned them to their folder, and walked to the large windows overlooking the garden. Outside, the summer day continued, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred within these walls. Birds visited the feeder I'd hung last spring. The roses Harold had planted decades ago bloomed in vibrant shades of red and pink. Life continuing. I hadn't expected my children to understand immediately. Anger was the predictable first response. But beneath the anger, I had seen something else in their eyes. A flicker of recognition, perhaps. A grudging acknowledgement that something had been fundamentally wrong with our family dynamic for years. It would take time for that flicker to grow into acceptance, and longer still for acceptance to transform into gratitude. They might never thank me for what I'd done today. I had made peace with that possibility. What mattered was that for the first time in decades I had acted as a mother rather than a bank. I had given them something they actually needed rather than everything they wanted, and in doing so, I had reclaimed something essential for myself. My own history, my own purpose, my own voice. I raised my champagne glass in a solitary toast. "Happy birthday to me," I said aloud, "and to new beginnings." The future stretched before me, uncertain but full of possibility. I had no illusions that the path forward would be easy. There would be lawyers' letters, heated accusations, perhaps even public drama if James decided to fight dirty. But I had spent 70 years building a life defined by others' expectations. I could spend whatever years I had left defining it for myself. Starting with finishing my birthday lunch, alone, but more myself than I had been in decades. The silence after my children left was profound. I didn't clear the dishes immediately, choosing instead to sit with the weight of what had just happened. Outside, clouds gathered, casting shifting shadows across the dining room as I contemplated the past that had led us here. I had met Harold Clarke in the spring of 1975 at a university fundraising event. I was 23, working as an administrative assistant in the alumni office while taking night classes to finish my business degree. My scholarship had covered undergraduate studies, but graduate courses required creative financing. Hence my presence at the event, simultaneously working and networking. Harold was 35, already successful in real estate development, and recently divorced from his first wife. He stood out in the crowd, tall, confident, with a smile that transformed his otherwise serious face. When he approached me, I assumed he needed assistance with a donation. Instead, he asked about my studies. "Business administration," I told him, surprised by his interest. "With a focus on nonprofit management." "Ambitious," he replied, his eyes warming. "Any particular cause?" I hesitated, unaccustomed to wealthy donors showing genuine interest in staff. "Educational access." I was the first in my family to attend college. It changed everything for me. Something in my answer resonated with him. He stayed by my side for the remainder of the evening, asking thoughtful questions about my background, my goals, my challenges. By the time the event concluded, he had invited me to dinner the following weekend. Our courtship was swift and overwhelming. Harold moved through the world with an assurance I had never known in my working-class neighborhood. He introduced me to fine dining, art galleries, weekend trips to coastal towns in his sleek car. I was dazzled, not just by the luxury, but by his apparent belief in my potential. "You have a natural elegance," he told me one evening as we sat in his penthouse overlooking the city. "Like you were born for this life." I didn't correct him. Didn't mention that my natural elegance had been carefully studied from magazines and movies practiced in the privacy of my small apartment. That my accent had been deliberately softened to hide the neighborhood I came from. That every outfit I wore in his presence represented a significant portion of my monthly budget. Instead, I leaned into becoming the woman he saw, polished, poised, perfect for the life he was building. When he proposed 6 months later, presenting a diamond ring that cost more than my parents' entire house had, I said yes without hesitation. Not just because I loved him, though I did, but because he offered a portal to a world that had previously seemed as distant as the moon. "We'll be magnificent together," he promised, sliding the ring onto my finger. "You'll see." The only shadow on my happiness was my parents' absence. Both gone before they could see me step into this new life. I had no family to invite to the wedding, a fact that seemed to relieve Harold rather than concern him. "A clean slate," he called it. Just us and our future. Our wedding was featured in the society pages, the rising real estate developer and his beautiful, mysterious bride. Harold's family attended with barely concealed curiosity about the woman their son had chosen. His mother, Eleanor Clarke, a formidable woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, assessed me with calculating eyes throughout the reception. "Harold says you're from out of state," she remarked during a rare moment alone. "Your parents couldn't attend?" "They passed away," I replied simply. "A few years ago." She nodded, something like approval flickering across her features. Sometimes a fresh start is best. Harold needed someone without complications. It was only years later that I understood what she meant, that my lack of family connections made me a convenient choice. No messy in-laws, no conflicting loyalties, no one to question Harold's decisions or influence mine. I was a blank canvas onto which the Clarke family identity could be painted without interference. The rain began to fall outside my dining room, windows, gentle at first, then building to a steady rhythm against the glass. I stood, finally clearing the untouched lunch plates, carrying them to the kitchen where I methodically transferred food to storage containers. My thoughts remained in the past, excavating the foundations of the choices that had led to today's confrontation. After our wedding, I had embraced my new identity completely. Eleanor Novak disappeared into the archives, and Eleanor Clarke emerged, the perfect corporate wife, charity organizer, and eventually, mother. I adopted Harold's preferences, his social circle, his values. When James was born in 1980, I followed Harold's lead on everything from the hospital selection to the nanny hiring to the preschool applications. Harold was not an unkind husband, but he was definitive in his vision for our family. Our children would have the best of everything: the finest schools, exclusive summer camps, private tutors, European vacations. They would grow up secure in their position in society, confident in their future prosperity. He established trust funds for each child on their 5th birthdays, with substantial initial deposits and regular contributions. They'll never know. The uncertainty I faced, he told me one night after setting up Michael's fund. They'll be free to pursue their passions without worrying about survival. I didn't share how this approach troubled me, how different it was from my own upbringing, where every achievement came through effort, every privilege was earned. I didn't tell him that the hunger that had driven his success, the hunger he'd admired in me when we met, came precisely from facing uncertainty, from needing to prove ourselves. Instead, I focused on creating a beautiful home, on being an attentive mother, on supporting Harold's increasingly successful business ventures. I volunteered for prestigious charitable organizations, but kept my involvement superficial. I hosted dinner parties where conversations never ventured beyond safe topics: travel, property values, children's achievements. By the time Harold died of a sudden heart attack in 2010, I had spent 35 years living someone else's life. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof as I finished in the kitchen and moved to the living room. I settled into the window seat with a cup of tea, watching rivulets trace patterns down the glass. The house felt expansive in its emptiness, breathing around me like a living thing. For the first time in years, I embraced the solitude rather than feeling diminished by it. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. "Rebecca, we need to talk, all of us. Tomorrow at 10, your house." No request, just a demand. Some habits died hard. I typed a simple response: "I'll be here." Another text followed, this one from Michael. "Are you okay, Mom?" The question touched me. Despite everything, he was checking on my well-being. I replied, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than I've been in a long time." James, predictably, didn't contact me at all. He would be consulting attorneys, reviewing documents, searching for loopholes. It was his way, attacking problems with aggressive precision, convinced that enough pressure would bend any situation to his will, a quality he had inherited directly from his father. The foundation of my relationships with my children had been built on financial dependence. James, with his multiple failed marriages and extravagant lifestyle. Rebecca, with her appearance of success masking substantial debt from maintaining a facade of affluence. Michael, with his cycle of addiction and recovery, each stint in rehabilitation more expensive than the last. They had grown into adults who measured their worth by their bank balances, their social status, their material possessions. And I had enabled this, year after year, check after check, bailout after bailout. The turning point had come not just at that Christmas dinner, but during a conversation with my housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, the following morning. "They don't see you, Mrs. Clarke," she had said as she cleared the breakfast dishes. We had developed a comfortable familiarity over her 15 years of service, though I had always maintained certain boundaries. "What do you mean, Margaret?" I asked, surprised by her directness. She hesitated, then continued with gentle honesty. "They see what you provide, not who you are. My own children are the same age as yours, but they'd never speak to me the way yours spoke to you last night." "Your children weren't raised with wealth," I replied defensively. "No," she agreed. "They weren't. They had to work alongside me after their father left. But they respect me because I respected myself enough to set boundaries." Her words had lingered, a quiet indictment of the family dynamic I had allowed to develop. The next day, I had made the call to Sophia Goldman, setting in motion the plan that culminated in today's revelation. The rain eased as evening approached, the clouds breaking to reveal glimpses of sunset. I moved through the house, turning on lamps against the gathering dusk. In the library, I paused before the portrait of Harold that dominated the room. The artist had captured his essence perfectly. The intelligence in his eyes, the slight quirk of his mouth that suggested both amusement and judgment. "They're so angry," I told his painted face. "But you would understand why I did it, wouldn't you? You built your fortune from nothing. You knew the value of struggle." What I didn't say aloud was that Harold had been a complex contradiction. It's a self-made man who wanted to spare his children the very challenges that had forged his character. A husband who admired my ambition, but preferred me in a supporting role. A man who knew the price of everything, but had lost sight of the value of certain intangibles: resilience, purpose, integrity. I had loved him, but I had also allowed his vision to subsume my own. His death had freed me in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until recently. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Sophia Goldman's name appeared on the screen. "Eleanor," she greeted me warmly. "How did it go?" "About as expected," I replied, moving to sit in one of the leather armchairs. Shock, anger, disbelief. "They're coming back tomorrow morning to continue the discussion. Do you want me there?" she offered. "For legal support?" I considered this briefly. "No, I think this needs to be family only, but thank you." "Remember," she said, "everything is finalized. They can express all the anger they want, but legally, the foundation is established and funded. The transfers are complete." "I know," I assured her. "This isn't about legalities anymore. It's about helping them understand why this was necessary." After we hung up, I found myself drawn to a room I rarely entered. Harold's home office, preserved almost exactly as he had left it 15 years earlier. The heavy mahogany desk still held his leather blotter, his fountain pen stand, the small clock he had received for 25 years in business. I opened the bottom drawer, retrieving a key I had discovered years ago but never used. The key unlocked a small safe hidden behind a false panel in the bookcase. Inside lay documents I had never examined during Harold's life: journals, letters, papers that he had kept private from even me. I had respected his privacy in death as I had in life, leaving these personal effects untouched. But tonight, something compelled me to look. The journal on top was dated 1965-1970, covering the years before I met him. I settled into his chair and began to read, discovering a Harold I had never known. A young man struggling to establish himself after his mother had cut him off financially for defying her wishes regarding his education. "Another rejection today," he wrote in October 1966. 11 banks have now declined to finance the Westfield project, running out of options and nearly out of rent money. Called mother to ask for a small loan. She suggested I apply for a position at Uncle William's insurance firm. said this real estate fantasy had gone on long enough. I hung up. Would rather sleep in my car than admit defeat. I read entry after entry, witnessing Harold's journey from desperate determination to grudging, success to eventual triumph. The voice in these pages was raw, vulnerable, so different from the confident, sometimes imperious man I had married. A letter from his mother, dated 1972, provided further insight. Harold, I acknowledge that your stubborn refusal to accept my guidance has, against all odds, resulted in some measure of success. While I maintain that your approach to business is unnecessarily risky, I can no longer deny that you have proven your capability. The trust fund is now available to you, as originally intended before our unfortunate disagreement. I hope you will use these resources wisely to solidify your position rather than continuing to gamble on speculative ventures. Harold had never mentioned this estrangement from his family wealth, this period of struggle and determination. He had presented his success as the natural progression of a privileged young man with vision and intelligence. Why had he hidden this crucial chapter of his life? The answer came in a journal entry from 1979, shortly before James was born. Dinner with mother tonight. Insufferable as always. She had the gall to suggest that my success validates her decision to cut me off. It made you who you are, she said, as if taking credit for my years of struggle. I didn't contradict her, but the truth is I succeeded despite her, not because of her. My children will never face such unnecessary hardship. I'll make sure they have every advantage from the start. They'll never know the humiliation of failure or the sting of rejection that I endured. I closed the journal, understanding washing over me like a wave. Harold's entire approach to parenting, to wealth, to our family's identity, had been a reaction to his own painful experiences. He had swung to the opposite extreme of his mother's tough love approach, never realizing he was creating a different kind of damage. And I, in my eagerness to embrace the security and status he offered, had become complicit in this well-intentioned mistake. Morning arrived with clear skies and a sense of purpose. I dressed carefully in a sage green linen suit, professional, but approachable, and prepared the sunroom for the meeting with my children. Fresh coffee, pastries from the local bakery, comfortable seating arranged for conversation rather than confrontation. I placed the foundation brochures on the central table, along with Harold's journal and a few photographs I had selected overnight. They arrived together, a united front. James in a business suit despite the weekend, Rebecca similarly formal, Michael more casual but unusually sober and alert. Their expressions ranged from tight-lipped anger to wary curiosity. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing toward the seating area. "Please, help yourselves to coffee." "We're not here for refreshments," James stated flatly. "We've been up half the night discussing this situation." "I understand," I replied calmly, "and I'm ready to listen." Rebecca took charge, as she often did in crisis scenarios. "We've agreed to approach this rationally," she began, her corporate negotiation voice in full effect. "While we're hurt and shocked by your decision, we recognize that legally, the foundation is established. Fighting it would be expensive and uncertain. Not to mention incredibly public," Michael added. "Family dirty laundry all over the news." James shot him a warning look. They had clearly rehearsed this approach. "Instead," Rebecca continued, "we want to propose a compromise. Keep the foundation, but reduce its share to 50% of the estate rather than 90%. That still leaves a substantial charitable legacy while providing more appropriately for your family." I nodded, acknowledging their proposal without immediately responding. "Before I address that, I'd like to share something with you. Something I discovered only last night." I picked up Harold's journal, opening to the marked page. "These are your father's private journals. I never read them while he was alive, and I'd never shared them if I didn't believe they were crucial to understanding our current situation." I read aloud the entries I had discovered, watching their expressions shift from impatience to surprise to thoughtful consideration. "Dad was cut off?" Michael asked incredulously, but he always made it sound like Grandma handed him everything on a silver platter. "He was deeply ashamed of that period," I explained. "He saw it as weakness, as failure, rather than the foundation of his strength. And he was determined that you would never experience what he considered unnecessary hardship." "So all those lectures about financial responsibility," James said slowly, "all while he was bankrolling our every whim." "He had complex feelings about money and success," I acknowledged. "He was proud of building something from nothing, but he never wanted you to feel the fear and uncertainty he had experienced." "But that doesn't explain why you're doing this now," Rebecca pressed. "Dad's been gone for 15 years. Why suddenly decide we need to be cut off?" "Because I finally understood what my compliance has cost you," I said gently. "Not just him, but me. I've been enabling a cycle that's preventing you from becoming who you could be." I turned to James. "You're brilliant with numbers, with seeing opportunities others miss. You have your father's eye for value, but you've never had to apply those talents beyond managing wealth that was handed to you." To Rebecca, "You're an exceptional strategist. Your organizational skills are remarkable. Yet you've used them primarily to maintain appearances rather than to build something meaningful." And finally, to Michael, "You have more heart, more creativity, more genuine empathy than anyone I know. But without boundaries, without necessary structure, those gifts have been suffocated by addiction and drift." They were silent, uncomfortable under this direct assessment, but not interrupting. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I continued. "I'm doing it because I believe in you more than you believe in yourselves. You're not trust fund children who need protecting from the world. You're capable adults who deserve the dignity of your own achievements." I opened the foundation brochure, turning to the page that outlined the board structure. "The foundation will require active leadership, real involvement, not just ceremonial positions. Each board member will oversee specific program areas, working directly with scholarship recipients, mentoring, creating opportunities. It's not about writing checks, it's about genuine engagement with people whose lives can be transformed by educational access." "And you think we'd be good at that?" Michael asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I know you would," I replied, "if you choose to be." James, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "Yesterday, I was furious. I called 3 different attorneys." He paused, glancing at his siblings. "But last night, I kept thinking about something. When Elise left me last year, she said I had no purpose beyond maintaining my lifestyle. I dismissed it as bitter ex-wife talk, but..." He trailed off, uncharacteristically vulnerable. Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. Rebecca reached for a foundation brochure, examining it more carefully than she had the day before. "The structure is impressive," she admitted reluctantly. "The endowment model ensures sustainability. The focus is narrow enough to make measurable impact. I had good advisors," I acknowledged, "but I'd welcome your expertise in refining the approach." "I've been thinking," Michael said hesitantly, "about those summer art programs I kept trying to start but never followed through on. The ones for kids in recovery." He looked at me directly. "Could something like that fit within the Foundation's mission?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "Educational opportunity takes many forms. The Foundation's scope is purposely flexible." A tentative hope began to build in my chest as I watched them engage with the idea, asking questions, offering suggestions, beginning to see possibilities beyond their initial anger. "To answer your original proposal," I finally said, addressing Rebecca, "the 90-10 split remains. But your involvement with the Foundation offers something potentially more valuable than inheritance: purpose, impact, legacy. Not just spending wealth, but transforming lives with it, including your Own. I reached for the photographs I had brought, not the society portraits that lined our hallways, but the candids I had kept private. James at 11, proudly displaying the model bridge that had won his science fair. Rebecca at 16, passionately, debating at a Model UN conference. Michael at 14, teaching neighborhood children to paint in our backyard. This is who you were before money became your primary focus, I said softly. These versions of you still exist. They're just waiting for the right conditions to re-emerge. The conversation continued through the morning, moving gradually from confrontation to consideration to cautious collaboration. By lunchtime, no final decisions had been made, but the temperature in the room had shifted dramatically. They agreed to attend the first foundation board meeting to learn more before committing fully. As they prepared to leave, Michael hung back, waiting until his siblings had stepped outside. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on us." I embraced him, feeling the solid presence of my youngest child, the fragility and strength that had always defined him. "I never will," I promised. That's what real love looks like, believing in someone's best self, even when they've lost sight of it. After they left, I stood in the doorway, watching them drive away. The foundation would face challenges. My relationships with my children would require rebuilding on new terms. There would be setbacks, disappointments, perhaps even failures. But for the first time in decades, we were moving toward authenticity rather than away from it. Toward purpose, rather than mere privilege. Toward becoming the family we might have been all along, if we'd had the courage to face our truths sooner. I closed the door, returning to the sunroom to clear the coffee cups. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams. Outside, the garden sparkled with raindrops from yesterday's storm, each one catching and reflecting the light. Sometimes I thought, that's what transformation looks like. Ordinary moments suddenly illuminated from within, revealing beauty that was always present but previously unseen. The Foundation's first official board meeting was scheduled for the second Tuesday in September, 6 weeks after my birthday revelation. I arrived early, wanting to ensure everything was perfectly prepared. The meeting would take place in the conference room of the downtown office space I had leased specifically for the Eleanor Clarke Foundation, a deliberate choice to separate the foundation's work from my home and personal life. The space was modern but warm, with large windows overlooking the city park, walls painted in soft creams and sage greens, and artwork from local artists adorning the corridors. The conference room featured a large oval table rather than the traditional rectangular boardroom setup, a small but significant choice that emphasized collaboration over hierarchy. As I arranged portfolios at each seat, I reflected on the weeks that had passed since that transformative birthday lunch. The initial shock had given way to a complex series of negotiations, emotional more than legal, as my children adjusted to the new reality I had created. James had been the most resistant, predictably. He had indeed consulted attorneys who confirmed what Sophia had assured me. The Foundation's establishment was legally sound. After exhausting his legal options, he had shifted to cold formality. In our interactions, attending preliminary planning meetings with rigid professionalism but minimal personal engagement. He was present but distant, participating without truly connecting. Rebecca had approached the situation with her characteristic analytical efficiency, immersing herself in research about educational foundations, governance structures, and impact metrics. She had sent me detailed emails with questions and suggestions, some genuinely insightful, others thinly veiled attempts to increase family influence over the Foundation's assets. Her strategy seemed to be to accept the new paradigm while attempting to reshape it to her advantage. An approach I found both frustrating and oddly endearing in its predictability. Michael's response had surprised me most. After our conversation following the family meeting, he had enrolled himself in an outpatient recovery program. not because of a recent relapse, but as he explained in a text message that brought tears. To my eyes, because I want to show up for this as the best version of myself. He had been the most engaged with the Foundation's mission, asking thoughtful questions about the potential scholarship recipients and exploring how his background in arts education might contribute to the Foundation's work. Sophia arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time, bringing with her the final legal documents requiring signatures from the founding board members. "Nervous?" she asked, setting her briefcase on the conference table. Cautiously. "Optimistic," I replied, straightening a portfolio that didn't need straightening. "They're coming, at least. That's a start." "More than a start," Sophia said, her tone reassuring. "From what you've told me, they've each engaged in their own way. That's significant progress given where you began." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. "I just hope." The door opened, interrupting my thought. To my surprise, all three of my children entered together, 15 minutes early. They were dressed professionally, James and Rebecca in business attire, Michael in a blazer over a crisp button-down shirt, and carried notebooks or tablets. They looked like executives arriving for an important meeting, which, I supposed, they were. "We thought we'd come early to review the agenda," Rebecca explained, nodding a greeting to Sophia. "Perfect timing," I replied, working to keep my voice steady despite the surge of emotion I felt seeing them arrive prepared and punctual. "The other board members will be here at 10. "Other board members?" James questioned, his eyebrow raising. Slightly. This was new information. "Yes," I confirmed. "The Foundation bylaws require a minimum 7-person board. The three of you, myself, Sophia as legal counsel, and 2 independent directors with expertise in education and nonprofit management." On cue, the door opened again, admitting the final 2 board members. Dr. Lydia Washington, former Dean of Education at the State University and a nationally recognized expert on first-generation student success, entered first. Behind her came Marcus Rodriguez, who had built a successful scholarship program for rural students before transitioning to consulting for educational nonprofits. I made the introductions, watching my children's reactions carefully. James maintained his professional mask, shaking hands firmly and offering appropriate pleasantries. Rebecca immediately engaged Dr. Washington in conversation about retention statistics for scholarship programs. Michael seemed momentarily intimidated, but relaxed when Marcus mentioned his own recovery journey as part of his personal story. As we took our seats around the oval table, I felt a peculiar sense of rightness, as if pieces long misaligned were finally settling into their proper places. I opened the meeting with a brief welcome, then turned to the formal business of establishing the board. "Before we proceed with the agenda," I said, "I want to be clear about something. Your positions on this board are not ceremonial, nor are they guaranteed. Each of you is here because I believe you bring valuable perspective and skills. But your continued involvement will depend on your genuine contribution to the Foundation's mission." I made eye contact with each of my children as I continued. This applies equally to family and non-family board members. The Foundation exists to create educational opportunities for deserving students, not to serve as a family jobs program or a salve for my conscience. If you're not fully committed to that mission, this is the time to excuse yourself. No hard feelings. The room was silent for a moment. I held my breath, uncertain whether one or more of my children might actually stand and leave. Instead, James cleared his throat. "I think I speak for all of us," he said, glancing at his siblings, "when I say we're here because we've chosen to be. Whatever our initial reactions to the Foundation's creation, we've had time to consider its purpose and potential impact. We're committed to doing this right." Rebecca and Michael nodded in agreement, though with varying degrees of enthusiasm. It wasn't a wholehearted endorsement, but it was honest. And honesty was what we needed most. "Thank you," I said simply. "Let's begin." The meeting proceeded with a review of the Foundation's legal structure, financial resources, and preliminary program objectives. Sophia presented the formal documents requiring signatures, explaining each one in detail. Dr. Washington and Marcus shared insights from their experiences with similar initiatives, highlighting both successes and pitfalls to avoid. Throughout the discussion, I observed my children with cautious hope. James asked incisive questions about financial oversight and investment strategies, his expertise in portfolio management evident despite his lingering reservations. Rebecca took detailed notes, occasionally interjecting with thoughtful process improvements or governance suggestions. Michael was quieter, but fully engaged, his focus particularly sharp during discussions of how to identify and support students with potential but challenging circumstances. When we reached the agenda item about board roles and responsibilities, I took a calculated risk. As the founder, I'll serve as board chair for the first 2 years, I explained. After that, leadership will rotate among qualified board members, but we need to establish committee chairs today to begin the real work of the foundation. I turned to James. The investment committee requires someone with financial acumen and attention to detail. James, would you consider chairing this committee? The foundation's sustainability depends on prudent management of its assets. His expression revealed surprise followed by careful consideration. I would, he said finally, on the condition that I have true decision-making authority within established guidelines, not just a title. Absolutely, I agreed. The committee will develop investment policies for board approval, then implement them independently with quarterly performance reviews. I shifted my attention to Rebecca. The Governance and Strategy Committee needs someone who understands organizational systems and strategic planning. Rebecca, your experience in corporate structures would be invaluable here. She straightened in her seat, professional pride evident in her posture. I'd be interested. I have some ideas about metrics for measuring program effectiveness and ensuring accountability. Finally, I looked at Michael. This was the biggest gamble. The Student Experience Committee will work directly with scholarship recipients developing mentorship programs and support systems beyond financial assistance. Michael, would you consider leading this effort? Your empathy and creativity would bring something special to this role. Michael blinked rapidly, emotion crossing his face before he composed himself. Really? You trust me with that? I do, I said firmly. Your personal journey gives you insight others might lack. You understand both privilege and struggle in ways that could be tremendously valuable to students navigating unfamiliar worlds. He nodded slowly. I'd like to try. I can't promise I'll be perfect at it, but I care about getting it right. That's exactly why you're the right person, I assured him. As the meeting continued, I felt a shift in the room's energy. My children were engaging not as reluctant participants or aggrieved heirs, but as professionals with valuable contributions to make. The independent board members responded to their ideas with respect and thoughtful feedback. For perhaps the first time, James, Rebecca, and Michael were being seen and valued for their capabilities rather than their family name or wealth. When we adjourned for lunch, catered in a nearby conference room, the conversation continued, naturally breaking into smaller discussions about next steps and implementation details. I stepped back, allowing these interactions to develop without my direction. Dr. Washington approached me as I stood by the window, observing the others. You've taken quite a risk, she commented quietly. Family foundations can become battlegrounds. I know, I acknowledged. But continuing as we were presented an even greater risk, the risk of wasted potential and unfulfilled lives. She studied me thoughtfully. This isn't just about helping scholarship students, is it? I smiled, appreciating her perceptiveness. The foundation will change many lives. I hope some of them belong to my children. Bold move, she said with approval. Most people their age are set in their ways. They're more adaptable than they realize, I replied. They just needed the right motivation to discover that about themselves. The afternoon session focused on establishing the first scholarship program, targeted to launch with the next academic year. We needed to develop selection criteria, application processes, award amounts, and support structures. The discussion was lively, occasionally heated, but remarkably productive. James advocated for clear financial guardrails, but surprised me by arguing against making GPA the primary selection criterion. Raw academic talent isn't the only predictor of success, he pointed out. Determination and resourcefulness matter, more in the long run. Rebecca proposed a comprehensive onboarding program for scholarship recipients. It's not enough to give them money, she insisted. First-generation students often lack the implicit knowledge that helps others navigate college effectively. We need structured support that addresses this gap without being condescending. Michael, growing more confident as the meeting progressed, suggested incorporating current college students as peer mentors. Someone just a couple steps ahead on the journey can provide guidance that feels authentic and accessible, he explained. Plus, it creates a community rather than just a financial transaction. By the end of the day, we had established clear next steps for each committee, scheduled follow-up meetings, and signed all necessary legal documents. As the independent board members departed, offering positive feedback about the productive session, my children lingered in the conference room. Dinner? I suggested. There's a new restaurant 2 blocks from here that's supposed to be excellent. They exchanged glances, that silent sibling communication that had often excluded me in the past. But this time, James nodded. That sounds good. I'm actually starving. The restaurant was bustling but not overcrowded, with warm lighting and comfortable seating. We were shown to a corner table that offered a balance of privacy and atmosphere. After ordering drinks, wine for James and Rebecca, sparkling water for Michael and me, a moment of awkward silence descended. Well, I said finally, I think that went better than any of us might have expected. It was. Interesting, Rebecca admitted. Dr. Washington is impressive. I've read some of her research, but meeting her in person gave me new perspective on the challenges first generation students face. Marcus has an amazing story, Michael added. Did you know he was homeless for part of his freshman year of college? He showed me pictures of the scholarship program he built. The graduation rate is incredible. James remained quiet, swirling his wine thoughtfully before speaking. The foundation is well structured, he acknowledged. Professional. More substantial than I initially assumed. What did you think it would be? I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged slightly. Honestly, I thought it might be a vanity project. Something to put your name on letterhead and attend occasional galas. I considered that approach, I admitted. It would have been easier, but it wouldn't have addressed what really matters to me. Which is what, exactly? Rebecca asked, her tone somewhere between skeptical and curious. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, wanting to express this clearly. Impact that extends beyond good intentions, real change in individual lives, and... I hesitated, then continued honestly. The opportunity for all of us to build something meaningful together. Even though you basically forced us into it? James challenged, though without the anger that had characterized his initial reaction. I created circumstances that invited reconsideration, I corrected gently. You each made your own choice, to engage rather than simply oppose or withdraw. Michael laughed unexpectedly. That's the most diplomatic way I've ever heard someone describe dropping a nuclear bomb on their family's expectations. His laughter broke the tension, bringing reluctant smiles from James and Rebecca. I found myself laughing too, the absurdity of the situation suddenly apparent to all of us. I suppose it was rather dramatic, I conceded. But subtle hints hadn't proven effective over the years. That's fair, Rebecca acknowledged. We weren't exactly attentive to your evolving priorities. The conversation flowed more naturally after that, shifting between foundation business and personal updates. As we shared dessert, a flourless chocolate cake that we passed around the table, I realized we were having the most genuine family meal in years. Not performance or obligation, but actual connection. I have a proposition, I said as the evening wound down. The foundation will require significant time and attention from each of you, rather than trying to squeeze this work around your existing commitments. I'd like to propose compensation packages commensurate with your roles and responsibilities. You want to pay us to work for the foundation? James asked, surprised. The foundation wants to compensate its leadership appropriately, I clarified. You'd be expected to dedicate substantial time, perhaps 20 hours weekly to start, potentially more as programs develop. That deserves proper compensation. Are you suggesting we leave our current positions? Rebecca questioned, looking concerned. That would be your decision, I replied. The compensation would be competitive, with market rates for similar roles in the nonprofit sector, sufficient to live comfortably, though not extravagantly. Significantly less than what you're accustomed to, but with much greater potential for meaningful impact. They were silent, processing this unexpected proposal. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, I assured them. Just consider it as an option. The foundation needs dedicated leadership to succeed. You each bring valuable skills and perspectives. If you're genuinely interested in being part of this work, I want to make it feasible for you to do so wholeheartedly, not as an afterthought. Michael was the first to respond. I don't really have a career to leave, he said with characteristic bluntness. Just a series of false starts and disappointments. This could be different. Something real. Rebecca looked thoughtful. I'd need to see the numbers. Understanding the scope of the commitment versus the compensation would be essential for a rational decision. Of course, I agreed. Sophia can provide detailed proposals for each position. James remained quiet until we had paid the bill, and were standing outside the restaurant in the cool evening air. As Rebecca and Michael debated whether to share a rideshare, he turned to me. This isn't what I expected, he said quietly. When you first announced the foundation, I thought you were punishing us for disappointing you. Never that, I assured him. Redirecting, perhaps. Challenging, certainly. But not punishing. He nodded slowly. I've been managing trust fund money for 20 years. It's comfortable. Safe. I'm good at it. He paused. But I've never built anything of my own. Never created value. Just preserved what was handed to me. You could build something now, I suggested. Something with impact beyond quarterly returns. Maybe, he acknowledged. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need, I said. The opportunity won't disappear. As I watched my 3 children depart, Rebecca and Michael sharing a car after all, James walking toward the parking garage alone, I felt cautiously optimistic. The foundation's first meeting had exceeded my expectations. Their engagement had been substantive, their contributions meaningful. The opportunity I'd created was being recognized, if not yet fully embraced. I walked slowly back to my own car, enjoying the city evening. Couples strolled hand in hand. Restaurant patios hummed with conversation. A street musician played saxophone. On the corner, life continuing in all its complexity and beauty. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Congratulations on a successful first meeting. You've laid a strong foundation. The real work begins now. How right she was. Today had been promising, but just the beginning of a lengthy journey. My children might choose to commit fully to the foundation's work, or they might ultimately step away. They might discover new purpose and fulfillment, or retreat to familiar patterns. I couldn't control their choices, could only create the conditions that made growth possible. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I found myself thinking about my own parents, Alexander and Irina Novak, and what they might think of today's events. They had worked tirelessly to create opportunities for me, believing education would open doors to a better life. They couldn't have imagined the wealth and privilege their daughter would eventually attain, nor how that privilege would shape the next generation. Would they understand my decision to redirect that wealth? To challenge my children to become more than heirs? I believed they would. They had valued education not just for the financial security it could provide, but for how it expanded horizons and possibilities. For how it transformed not just circumstances, but character. The Eleanor Clarke Foundation was, in many ways, a return to those values. An acknowledgement of my roots, rather than a rejection of the life I had built with. Herald. It represented continuity rather than rupture, legacy redefined rather than abandoned. As I pulled into my driveway, the house lights automatically illuminating my arrival, I felt a profound sense of alignment, as if disparate parts of my life were finally converging into a coherent whole. Eleanor Novak and Eleanor Clarke, working class, daughter and wealthy widow, mother and philanthropist, no longer separate identities but integrated aspects of a single authentic self. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Foundation's work was just beginning. My relationships with my children remained works in progress, fragile but strengthening. The path forward would not be smooth or straight. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was moving toward something rather than away from it. Creating rather than maintaining. Beginning rather than ending. At 70, I had given myself the most unexpected birthday gift of all. Not just a new purpose, but a new future. One that honored all that had come before while embracing possibilities I was only now beginning to imagine. 6 months passed. With surprising swiftness, winter yielded to spring, bringing cherry blossoms to the park outside the Foundation's office windows and a sense of momentum to our work. What had begun as a shocking disruption to my children's expectations had evolved into something none of us could have anticipated, a genuine transformation, not just of our family dynamics, but of my children themselves. The Foundation's first round of scholarship applications had closed last week, with over 300 submissions from promising students across the state. Today, the selection committee would begin the evaluation process, narrowing the pool to 50 finalists for interviews. As I approached the Foundation offices, I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. This was the moment when our planning would translate into actual impact on real lives. I paused in the lobby, admiring how the space had evolved. No longer the sterile corporate environment we'd initially leased, it now reflected the Foundation's emerging identity. Student artwork adorned the walls, pieces purchased from local high school art shows and community college exhibitions. Comfortable seating areas invited conversation rather than intimidating visitors. The Foundation's mission, statement, elegantly carved in wood, hung behind the reception desk, opening doors through education, building bridges across opportunity gaps. "Good morning, Mrs. Clarke," greeted Amara, the young receptionist we'd hired last month. A former scholarship recipient herself, now completing her business degree part-time, she embodied the Foundation's mission. "Good morning, Amara. Is everyone here already?" She nodded. "They're in the conference room. Mr. Clarke asked me to tell you they've started the preliminary sorting process." Mr. Clarke, James. My eldest, who had surprised me most of all. 3 months ago, he had resigned from his position managing trust fund investments. The decision had come after weeks of deliberation and several frank conversations with Marcus Rodriguez about transitioning from the private sector to nonprofit work. James had approached me not with tentative interest, but with a comprehensive proposal for expanding the Foundation's investment committee into a full financial strategy division, complete with education-focused venture philanthropy initiatives. I've been playing it safe my entire career, he'd explained. Managing other people's wealth, preserving rather than creating. I want to build something that matters. The salary was less than a third of what he'd earned previously. He'd sold his penthouse apartment, moved to a modest townhouse closer to the foundation offices, and embraced a simplified lifestyle with unexpected enthusiasm. Most shocking of all, he'd ended his relationship with his status-conscious girlfriend when she'd made disparaging remarks about his charity phase. I found him in the conference room, surrounded by application files, deep in conversation with Dr. Washington about evaluation metrics. He glanced up as I entered, offering a warm smile that still caught me off guard, so different from the guarded, formal expressions I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Mom, perfect timing. We've developed a preliminary rating system that balances academic achievement with demonstrated resilience and community impact. I'd like your input before we finalize it. The easy way he included me, respected my perspective while confidently presenting his own ideas. This was a James I was still getting to know. Not the entitled heir or the resentful son, but a thoughtful professional finding his footing in meaningful work. I'd be happy to review it, I replied, setting down my bag and joining them at the table. Where are Rebecca and Michael? Rebecca's on a call with potential corporate partners, James explained. She's developed a matching grant program that's attracting serious interest. Michael's meeting with the student mentors at the university. Orientation starts next week. I nodded, a surge of pride warming my chest. Each of my children had found their own way to engage with the Foundation's mission, bringing their unique strengths to bear on different aspects of our work. Rebecca had been the last to fully commit. For 3 months, she had balanced her corporate career with part-time Foundation responsibilities, approaching both with her characteristic efficiency. But the tipping point had come during a site visit to a rural high school where she'd met students with extraordinary potential but limited resources. She'd returned to the office visibly moved, uncharacteristically emotional. These kids are brilliant, she'd told me. They're solving problems with duct tape and determination that my corporate team throws millions at. And they're being overlooked because they don't have the right pedigree or vocabulary. 2 weeks later, she'd tendered her resignation from the marketing firm and thrown herself into developing the Foundation's strategic partnerships full-time. She still maintained her polished professionalism, but with a new dimension of authentic passion that transformed her effectiveness. Michael's journey had been different, less dramatic but equally profound. He had embraced the Student Experience Committee role immediately, finding in it a perfect outlet for his natural empathy and creativity. 6 months of sobriety had cleared his thinking and stabilized his emotions. Working with prospective scholarship, recipients gave him purpose, while the structure of the Foundation provided the accountability he had always needed but resisted. He had moved out of his luxury apartment into a simple studio near campus, explaining with characteristic bluntness, "I can't talk to kids about authentic values while living like a trust fund brat." His recovery program remained a priority, now complemented by evening classes and educational counseling at the local university. The morning progressed efficiently as we refined the selection process for scholarship recipients. Dr. Washington provided valuable insights from her decades in higher education, while James focused on creating sustainable financial models that would support students throughout their academic journeys. I contributed where appropriate, but increasingly found myself in an advisory rather than directive role, exactly as I had hoped. Rebecca joined us mid-morning, bringing news of 3 new corporate partners committed to providing internship opportunities for scholarship recipients. Her presentation was concise but enthusiastic, reflecting her growing personal investment in the Foundation's success. "These aren't just token positions," she emphasized. "I've negotiated substantial stipends, meaningful projects, and dedicated mentors within each organization. Our students will gain legitimate professional experience and valuable network connections." "That's outstanding," Dr. Washington commented. Access to professional networks is often the invisible barrier for first-generation students, even after they earn their degrees. Rebecca nodded, a hint of regret crossing her features. I've been on the other side, hiring only from elite universities, favoring candidates who reminded me of myself. I never considered the talent pipeline I was missing by maintaining those biases. Self-awareness is the first step toward change, I offered gently. You're helping create a more equitable system now. She met my eyes, a moment of genuine connection passing between us. Better late than never, I suppose. Michael arrived shortly before lunch, bringing an energy that transformed the room's atmosphere. Where James brought analytical precision and Rebecca strategic vision, Michael contributed heart and human connection. He'd spent the morning training the peer mentors who would support our scholarship recipients, current college students who understood the challenges of navigating higher education from backgrounds of limited privilege. You should see these mentors, he reported enthusiastically. They're amazing, so committed to paying forward the opportunities they've received. One young woman works 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in engineering. Another is the first in his family to graduate high school, now heading to medical school next fall. His eyes shone with purpose as he described the mentorship program he had designed, incorporating elements from his own recovery experience, accountability partners, regular check-ins, celebration of incremental progress, and honest conversation about obstacles. The scholarship money matters enormously, he explained, but belonging matters just as much. These students need to know they're not imposters, that they deserve their place at the table. I listened, marveling at the wisdom emerging from my youngest child, the one we had all underestimated, myself included. His struggles with addiction and purpose had given him insights none of the rest of us possessed. What we had seen as weakness had become strength, transformed through reflection and purpose. We worked through lunch, ordering sandwiches delivered to the conference room as we finalized the selection protocols. By mid-afternoon, we had established clear criteria, evaluation rubrics, and a timeline for interviews. The foundation's first. Scholarships would be awarded in 6 weeks, changing lives and creating opportunities that would ripple outward in ways we couldn't yet imagine. As the meeting concluded, I found myself filled with quiet satisfaction. Not just with the foundation's progress, but with the transformation I was witnessing in my children. They were becoming the people they might have been all along, had wealth, not obscured their potential, and my own misguided indulgence not hindered their growth. Mom? James's voice interrupted my reflection. The others had departed, leaving just the 2 of us in the conference room. Do you have dinner plans? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. His tone was serious but not tense, thoughtful rather than troubled. Nothing specific, I replied. What did you have in mind? There's a new bistro a few blocks from here. Casual, but the food is supposed to be excellent. My treat. Thorsar, small but significant gesture. My treat. Reflected the shift in our relationship. No longer the entitled son expecting parental provision, but an adult taking responsibility even in small social exchanges. The bistro was intimate and unpretentious, with exposed brick walls and simple wooden tables. We were seated by a window, overlooking a small courtyard garden just beginning to bloom with spring flowers. After ordering, James seemed to gather his thoughts, uncharacteristically hesitant. I owe you an apology, he finally said, for how I reacted when you first announced the foundation, for the attorneys, the threats, the cold shoulder. I was terrified. Terrified? I echoed, surprised by his choice of words. Of what? He traced the rim of his water glass, organizing his thoughts. Of discovering who I am without wealth as a buffer. Of failing on my own merits rather than succeeding on inherited advantage. Of being ordinary. The vulnerability in his admission touched me deeply. James, please let me finish, he requested gently. I've been thinking about this for months, trying to articulate it clearly. He took a breath. My entire identity was built around being James Clarke, heir to the Clarke fortune. Not just financially, but socially, professionally, even romantically. My relationships, my social circle, my self-concept, all of it hinged on wealth I hadn't earned and didn't truly appreciate. Our appetizers arrived, but he barely noticed, intent on expressing something important. When you redirected that inheritance to the foundation, you didn't just change my financial future. You forced me to confront the emptiness at the core of the life I'd built. That wasn't my intention, I said softly. I never wanted to hurt you. But it was exactly what I needed, he countered. These past 6 months have been the most challenging and fulfilling of my life. For the first time, I'm building something meaningful, something based on my own efforts rather than Dad's. Legacy. I'm making decisions based on purpose rather than prestige. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features. I'm even dating someone new, a professor I met through the Foundation's Educational Advisory Committee. She wasn't impressed by my family name or my former salary. She challenges my thinking, questions my assumptions. It's refreshing. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. I'm so proud of you, James. Not for who you're dating or what job you've taken, but for having the courage to reinvent yourself at 45. That takes remarkable strength. I learned it from you, he replied. You reinvented yourself at 70. Showed all of us it's never too late to become more authentic. The meal continued with easier conversation, updates on his investment strategies for the foundation endowment, plans for expanding scholarship opportunities in future years, even some gentle teasing about his new relationship. By the time we finished dessert, sharing a tiramisu that reminded me of my first dates with Harold, I felt a connection with my eldest child that had eluded us for decades. As James paid the bill, insisting despite my offer to share it, he mentioned his real reason for the dinner invitation. Rebecca, Michael and I have been talking. We'd like to host a proper 70th birthday celebration for you. My birthday was 6 months ago, I reminded him with amusement. Consider it a delayed celebration, he suggested. Or perhaps more accurately, a recognition of what you set in motion that day. The Foundation's first scholarships will be awarded the same week. It seems fitting to celebrate both milestones together. I was touched by the gesture, especially coming from James, who had been most resistant to the Foundation initially. That sounds lovely. Nothing too elaborate, please. He laughed. Don't worry. We've all embraced simpler living these days, but we do want to honor you properly. And, he hesitated briefly, we'd like to invite some special guests, with your permission. What kind of special guests? I asked, curious about his mysterious tone. That's a surprise, he replied with a gentle smile. But I think you'll approve. The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity. The scholarship selection process moved from application reviews to finalist interviews. I participated in several of these conversations, deeply moved by the stories of remarkable young people overcoming extraordinary obstacles in pursuit of education. Their determination, resourcefulness, and clarity of purpose put my own privileged children's earlier attitudes into sharp relief and made our current work feel all the more meaningful. Rebecca threw herself into planning the joint celebration, applying her organizational skills to create what she described as an event with meaning, not just expensive flowers and champagne. Michael collaborated with local art students to create personalized elements that would make the evening special. James handled the mysterious special guests, maintaining a good-natured secrecy that piqued my curiosity. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening at the Botanical Gardens, a venue that balanced elegance with the Foundation's values of accessibility and education. As my driver approached the entrance, I noticed subtle but beautiful lighting, illuminating the path with student artwork displayed at intervals along the walkway. Inside the glass-walled atrium, approximately 60 people mingled. The Foundation's board and staff, representatives from partner organizations, and a group of unfamiliar faces that I assumed must be James's special guests. The space was transformed with simple but stunning decorations, living plants rather than cut flowers, handcrafted paper lanterns, and display boards showcasing the Foundation's first year of work. Rebecca greeted me at the entrance, elegant in a simple blue dress that complemented her features without the designer ostentation she had once favored. "Right on time," she approved, kissing my cheek. "Everyone's here. Are you ready?" "For what exactly?" I asked, still uncertain about the evening's agenda. "You'll see," she replied with uncharacteristic playfulness. "James and Michael are waiting to begin." She led me through the gathering to where my sons stood near a small stage area. Both looked handsome and, more importantly, genuinely happy, a quality I had rarely seen in either of them during their wealth-focused years. "The guest of honor has arrived," Rebecca announced, stepping back as James moved to the microphone. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice confident but warm. "We're gathered to celebrate two significant milestones: the official launch of the Eleanor Clarke Foundation Scholarship Program and the 70th birthday of our remarkable founder, my mother." Applause filled the atrium as I smiled, slightly embarrassed by the attention but touched by the genuine warmth in the room. "6 months ago," James continued, "our mother made a decision that initially shocked, angered, and frankly terrified her 3 children. She announced that the substantial inheritance we had been counting on, quite literally banking on, would instead fund educational opportunities for deserving students from backgrounds of limited financial means." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd at his candid acknowledgement. "To put it mildly, we didn't take the news well," he admitted with self-deprecating humor. "There may have been threats of legal action. There may have been some dramatic exits and slammed doors." Michael stepped forward, joining his brother. "What we didn't realize then," he added, "was that our mother wasn't taking something away from us. She was giving us the opportunity to become people worth being, to build lives of purpose rather than mere privilege." Rebecca moved to stand with her brothers, creating a visual unity that brought tears to my eyes. "Tonight we're announcing the Foundation's first 20 scholarship recipients," she explained. "Young people with extraordinary potential who will receive not just financial support, but mentorship, internship opportunities, and a community committed to their success." A screen behind them illuminated with photographs and brief biographies of the selected students, diverse faces filled with hope and determination. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as each name appeared. "But there's someone else we'd like to recognize tonight," Michael continued, gesturing toward me. "Someone who had the courage to disrupt comfortable patterns, to challenge deeply held assumptions, and to believe in transformation when it would have been easier to maintain the status quo." James stepped forward again. "Mom, when you established this foundation, you named it after yourself, the Eleanor Clarke Foundation. But in doing so, you left half your story untold." I felt a strange flutter in my chest, wondering where this was leading. "You introduced us to your history, to Eleanor Novak, daughter of Polish immigrants, first-generation college student, woman of determination and principle who somehow got lost in becoming Eleanor Clarke, wealthy widow and society matron." Rebecca joined them, her expression softer than I had seen it in years. "We'd like to honor both parts of your journey tonight, and the courage it took to reclaim your complete identity after decades of separation." Michael gestured toward the back of the room. "And we have some help in doing so." I turned to see a group of people I didn't recognize making their way forward. An elderly woman supporting herself with a cane, a middle-aged couple, several younger adults, even a few children. Their faces held unfamiliar features yet struck chords of recognition deep within me. "Mom," James said gently. Meet your family. Your cousin Sophia's children and grandchildren. Your uncle Tadeusz's great-grandchildren. Relatives from your father's side of the family that you lost touch with decades ago. I gasped, emotions overwhelming me as the elderly woman reached me first. Ellie? She said tentatively, using a nickname I hadn't heard since childhood. I'm Irina, named after your mother. My mother was your father's sister Wanda. Tears blurred my vision as I embraced her, memories flooding back of family gatherings long forgotten, of connections severed not by choice but by circumstance, and the gradual drift that comes with different life paths. How? I whispered to my children as more relatives approached, introducing themselves, connecting threads of family history I had let slip away. Research, Rebecca explained. Birth records, immigration documents, social media. Once we understood how important your heritage was, how much you had sacrificed by setting it aside, we wanted to help you reclaim it. It's our gift to you, Michael added. Not bought with inheritance money, but created through effort and genuine care. I moved through the circle of newly discovered relatives, absorbing names and connections, seeing echoes of my parents, features and faces 2 generations removed from them. The foundation celebration continued around us, but for those precious moments, I was Eleanor Novak again, reconnecting with roots I had allowed to wither. Later, as the formal program resumed, my children unveiled the final surprise of the evening, a dual naming ceremony for the foundation. The screen displayed a new logo, elegantly designed to incorporate both aspects of my identity. The Clarke Novak Foundation, honoring heritage, building futures. Because both stories matter, James explained to the assembled guests. The privilege that makes giving possible, and the struggle that makes giving meaningful. The journey from limited means to abundance, and the wisdom to use that abundance for greater purpose. As the evening concluded, I found myself surrounded by a new reality I could scarcely have imagined a year earlier. My children, transformed from entitled heirs to purposeful leaders, a foundation moving from concept to action, already changing lives. Family connections restored across generations and geography. My 70th year had not brought the quiet transition to elderly irrelevance I had once feared. Instead, it had become a doorway to the most authentic chapter of my life, and to my children's lives as well. The final guest to approach me was an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the retired president of the university I had attended on scholarship 5 decades earlier. Mrs. Clarke, he said, shaking my hand warmly. Or perhaps I should say, Ms. Novak Clarke now. What you've created here honors the true purpose of education, not just the acquisition of knowledge or credentials, but transformation. The changing of lives, the opening of doors, the building of bridges between what is and what might be. That's a lovely way to express it, I replied, touched by his articulation of values I had held but struggled to name. Your children tell me you were inspired partly by your own experience as a scholarship recipient, he continued. May I share something about that tradition? In my 50 years in education, I've observed a pattern. Those who receive such opportunities often feel a responsibility to create similar opportunities for others when they can. It's a chain of generosity that extends across generations, each link stronger for having received and then given in turn. I nodded, thinking of my parents' sacrifices, the scholarship that changed my trajectory, and now the foundation that would offer similar transformation to deserving students for generations to come. Your mother and father would be proud, he added gently, not of the wealth you accumulated, but of how you've chosen to deploy it, of the values you've reclaimed and passed on, not just to your children, but to the many young people who will benefit from your vision. As I thanked him for his kind words, I glanced across the room at James, Rebecca, and Michael, each engaged in animated conversation with foundation partners and newly discovered relatives. No longer defined by expectation or entitlement, they had found their own paths to purpose, different routes but similar destinations. My birthday gift to them had initially seemed like a loss, the redirection of anticipated inheritance toward charitable purposes. But what they had gained was infinitely more valuable, the opportunity to discover their own capabilities, to build rather than merely receive, to become people of substance rather than merely circumstance. And my gift to myself, at 70, had been equally precious. The courage to reclaim my complete identity, to reconcile my past with my present, and to create a legacy that honored both. Not just financial resources distributed, but values transmitted. Not just wealth redirected, but purpose rediscovered. As I moved to join my expanded family, children, cousins, distant relatives united by shared history and newly forged connections, I felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with my parents' dreams for their daughter had expanded to encompass new generations, new possibilities, new horizons. Not an ending, but a continuation. Not a loss, but a more meaningful form of inheritance. Not a funeral, but a rebirth for all of us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.